All right. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Staying warm? Yeah, a little chilly tonight, huh? Yeah, I'm Bruce Patton. I'm the curator here at Savoy. Thank you so much for coming out for our Japanese collectible car exhibit in our program here. What I'd like to do first is tell you about the current exhibits that we have on display out there. Hopefully you got to see them. So obviously we have the Quiet Greatness. But we have our Savoy Survivors that were just out front. We also still have the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. So those are winners through the decades. So hopefully you got to see those cars. And our supercars there in the other gallery. And of course our Savoy collection. So hopefully you got to enjoy those cars before. Also wanted to go ahead and mention what we have coming up in 2025. So we have coming up next is American Small Car. We have Bantam and Crosley's coming in January. I won't read through all of these, but you can kind of see we actually have some locally owned cars. So cars for people that are in Bartow County and surrounding counties. And you can kind of see the other ones. So, but go ahead and check our website so you can see the actual dates and what the exhibits are about. So also our 2025 schedule for the movies is out. So you'll see that also on our website. And we do try to marriage both, some of the exhibits we have, so you can kind of see we have the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, to kind of go for Japanese collectibles. We thought that would be fun. But you can see the other movies we have for 2025. And we'd also like to thank very much Styles Auto Care for helping us put on our Tireside chats. Without their support, we couldn't do, these great programs that we're able to have here. So thank them very much. And I'd like to go ahead now and introduce Ken Gross. So I think everybody knows Ken. He's a regular here at Savoy. So automotive historian. So we have Ken. We have Mark Brinker. Mark also is one of the authors of A Quiet Greatness, and he's an orthopedic surgeon out of Houston. And we have Myron Vernis, also one of the authors, and Myron is retired. He won't tell us what he did before, but he's retired and enjoying playing with cars. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over to Ken. Thanks, Ken.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. You're really pioneers. We have never had a forum on Japanese cars, collectible cars, and nobody else has that we know of, and no one has had an exhibit that we are presenting right now, and a lot of it is due to my two friends here. I do want to say a couple of quick things about them. Myron and I met when he was with the Glenmore Gathering, which was a lovely country club car show in Ohio that lasted for a number of years. Unfortunately, it's no longer lasting, but we never really, I don't know that we really talked about cars, but I knew Myron as, I'm going to use the word eccentric in a lovable way. He had a Hoffman X8, a rear engine car with an 8-cylinder engine and a configuration that even Henry Ford gave up on. And he had a Paxton, which was a road and track cover car, looked like a very futuristic, and it had a Porsche 356 engine. It was supposed to be a steam car, but it didn't get that far. So Myron, an unusual and eclectic collector. And Mark knows exactly what I'm going to say about him, probably, because Mark has had a number of Pebble Beach entries, including a Sorel sports car, which dazzled people last year, the Pontiac Vivant, which was a show car, and he managed to resurrect the fellow who designed it and had him at Pebble as well. Mark is also famous for tearing across the ramp at Pebble Beach in Chet Herbert's Streamliner, an expensive burst of power that impressed us all. I did not know until fairly recently that both of them were Japanese collectible car enthusiasts. If you go to Mark's garage, you'll see it's Setterinis. All the Ferraris and Maseratis and Lamborghinis, they're on one side of Italian collectibles. It's Setterinis are on the other side. Bizzarini and Moretti and so forth. But they are fascinated with Japanese collectible cars, and they put on a little display last year at Pebble Beach that I think got people thinking about these cars. And I want to ask them several questions about it. Full disclosure, they got to look at the questions earlier, something I almost never do, but they insisted and I complied. So I'll probably have a couple of questions they didn't see, just so we can keep it interesting. But enough of that. I want to ask them both, how did you get interested in Japanese collectible cars and why?
Why don't you start, Myron?
Your name's first on the book.
Okay. So my first car was a Japanese car. It was a Z car, and I loved it. And I didn't know a lot about cars other than it was a cool car and got me through college. But as I started thinking about Japanese cars, as I got a little bit older, and I've been collecting Japanese cars maybe about 10 years, it occurred to me that the Japanese people are really unique in the way that they think about problems and solve problems. They're very precise. The cars they build are fantastic, and it's a little country. It's like the size of Montana, and they pretty much took over the car industry when they put their mind to it. But they're precise about everything. I mean, if you go to Japan and you go to restaurants, they have more 3-star Michelin restaurants in Japan than pretty much any other place in the world. So their precision is not just automotive, but it's in everything. And they're not just precise in terms of thinking about things, they also execute that. And so that comes through in their Japanese cars, and that's where my interest grew from, just the fascination about how they think about problems and solve them.
Myron?
You know, before I answer, I'd like to thank the people at Savoy for hosting this exhibit, and to all of you for being fellow pioneers with the Savoy for supporting this. It's just great to see it happen, and it bodes well for the future of car enthusiasm. And that's kind of where it was for me. I kind of grew up owning and rebuilding and fixing Porsche 356s. Not because I was wealthy, it's because they were worth nothing at the time. And I could afford interchangeable VW parts. Well, and I stayed with that, had lots of 356s, was very active in the Porsche 356 registry. And I saw people my age, who I remember as teenagers and people in their 20s who are grassroots enthusiasts, kind of grow into being very skeptical and very, very jaded about cars. And I think kind of hit home with me in the 2016 registry holiday, where I was the Concord chairman, and all my friends who we used to trade secrets with about where to get the cheapest shock absorbers, what parts and change, all they could talk about was how much kids didn't like cars, young people didn't like cars, and that how much the cars were worth. Flash forward 2 weeks later, I was out in California. I was at Bob's Big Boy for the cruise-in they have every Friday night, and I heard about this event that happens at the Panda Express at Burbank Airport. And I went about 11 o'clock at night, and a bunch of young people in Japanese cars started cruising in. And by midnight it was rolling. There were 200 cars there. I was 2 to 3 times older than like the next oldest person there. And the enthusiasm there was the same level of enthusiasm that I had as a kid, you know, trying to patch together 356s. I said, okay, yeah, these kids are just as enthusiastic about cars. They're just not enthusiastic about 57 Chevys, which is okay because growing up, I wasn't enthusiastic about Model A Fords, and it's kind of a generational thing. So at that point, I said, we got to help legitimize this part of the hobby.
So some of you have probably seen A Quiet Greatness, the book that that Mark and Myron wrote. My experience with it was at the post office when they said, we're sending it to you, and the diminutive lady behind the counter said, another book is here for you, a box is here for you. And I thought, oh, good, it's the Japanese car. She said, and we can't lift it. I said, really? She said, yeah, neither of us. These 2 women are the front people in my post office. And sure enough, this thing weighed 35 pounds, 4 volumes plus an index. So an extraordinary achievement, truly. It's won some awards. It's won a great deal of notice. So I of course, wanted to ask both of them, How did you come up with this idea to do the book? Did you imagine, it's a three-part question, did you imagine that it would be 4.5 volumes and 35 pounds in weight? And when did you start it all?
So I didn't want to do the book at all. Myron talked me into it.
Yeah, okay. That was a year of me saying no. I retired to write this book with Mark.
Yeah.
No, so we said, okay, this is a big step in legitimizing this end of the hobby to the mainline enthusiasts is to have a book. And we recognize that no one had done a great book on Japanese cars. So we said, okay, we're going to take the risk. We're going to do it. We're going to do like a 200-page coffee table book. We'll knock it out in a year, and everything will be good.
Yeah, and then we said, well, maybe 200 pages isn't enough. 350 pages, that'll get it done. And so that was the plan. We were going to do a nice 350-page book. And we decided that if we wanted people to take Japanese cars seriously, it had to be high quality. So it had to be like a Ferrari book or a Porsche book. It couldn't be a paperback, or a hardback with cheap paper or cheap photography. Because there had been a couple of previous books that were, just not very thorough. So we decided it had to be super high quality. And then we started writing, and we started making lists of cars. And unfortunately, we discovered a lot of really cool cars.
Right, yeah, and the more research we did, the more cool cars we found. I kind of joke that the book cost us a lot of money, but the most expensive part of the process, we found cars we didn't know about. And I think between the two of us, we ended up buying 18 cars in this process. Some of which our wives may or may not know about.
We're both still married, barely.
Not to each other.
No. How would you describe, when you began your book, the Japanese collector car scene at the time? What was it like, and what was being collected?
Yeah, so as Myron said, it was kind of a grassroots young person thing. The only, collector cars that, collector car people, like people that go to Pebble Beach or Amelia Island, would know about would be like, the Toyota 2000 GT. That's sort of been
Cosmo, Skyline, maybe.
Not even Skyline. Maybe Skyline was sort of starting then, but sort of blue blood cars. Yeah, maybe the Cosmo. Definitely the Toyota 2000 GT. And it was really, people with passion, not necessarily what we would call collectors, and definitely not people that were looking at this as an investment.
Or really had much nostalgia about it, because the Japanese are very smart about how they approach the American market. To conquer the American market, they sent us their bread and butter, uninspiring cars. I know Olivier's in the room, but I often say that, the Japanese with their cars, like the French with the wine, they kept the best stuff for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so the American impression of Japanese cars was, they're a bunch of Pintos and, Vegas type of thing, more reliable. So that's why there was very little notoriety.
How long did it take you to do that book?
I think it was 3 weekends.
We stayed up late, though.
It was 6 years.
Wow.
It was 6 years. Now, it wasn't 6 years to write. About 2 years of it was getting the photographs. And getting the photographs, as you know, is not just finding the photographs. It's also getting the rights to the photography. And there's 2,200 photographs in the book. And, we had a big staff helping us. It was me and Myron, and I have a Maltese at home that would come by and, give me a little lick on the ankle every once in a while. But yeah, so we did all the work ourselves. So about 4.5 years was writing, and the writing included finding cars and then researching them. So the problem with this subject was that there was not a very well-defined circle. If you're writing about, Porsche, 550 Spiders, there's some defined population. But here, you know, we had the entire universe of Japanese cars, and you know, basically the criteria was, did Myron and I think it was interesting, cool, mechanically significant? So we were sort of the judge and jury of whether a car qualified, if you will. But it just kept growing. You know, it was scope creep.
Yeah. The great thing was that we had amazing cooperation from the manufacturers. We had full access to their archives because they hadn't paid much attention to them either. We ended up discovering the process was we'd go through archives, we would find photos that we wanted, then we'd go back to them, ask for their permission for these photos, and oftentimes we would find things that they didn't even know they had. They said, you know, where'd you find this photo? You know,
Right. They'd send us a link to, you know, to files that nobody had ever looked at, really. And a lot of them weren't labeled.
Right. That's why a lot of the photos, a lot of the images in the book are things that had never been published before, conceptual drawings that no one had ever seen.
And you don't speak Japanese. Was that a problem?
No.
And that's because the reference material they gave you was in English, or?
So most of what we got from them was photography. Now, there were some things that either Myron or I or both of us were very particular about. Like there's certain folklore about the Skylines, and they won 50, you know, consecutive races, and you just see that published over and over and over again. And I think both of us, you know, wanted to sort of get an end to that and actually show the races, right? So we were able to obtain the race results in Japanese, and so we hired a translator. So it's no longer just this sort of folklore, yeah, they won 50 races, but if you're interested, here's the 50 races. Here's the track, here's the date, here's the driver. So we really went to the end of the earth on some of this stuff, and sometimes it required paying a translator.
Right. And our plan was to go to Japan to do some more on-site research, but that was October of 2020, and there wasn't a lot of traveling happening at that time. So
I think it's terrific that you have sold 1,030 copies of this book.
Our wives feel the same way.
yeah, right. You know what's the best part of that is we went to every major publisher of high-end books, and they all said it's fantastic, it's wonderful, but no one's ever going to buy an expensive book on Japanese cars.
But you got retained one of the best book art directors in the business. And was it hard, Richard Barron, and was it hard to talk, ex-Road and Track, hard to talk him into helping and getting involved?
No, because we lied to him. We told him it was going to be a 200-page book.
No, he was wonderful, and I subsequently did another book with him, and he's terrific.
Yeah. What the critical response for this book, as I recall, was pretty good. I mean, people were obviously impressed that it's 4 volumes and a reference book, but any part of the response was particularly gratifying for you?
Well,
I think a year ago kind of hit home when the book won the International Historic Motoring Awards Publication of the Year. Mm-hmm. And it really was international. We went to London for the awards ceremony, and to be up there with...
Made it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm thinking. So I asked them a question earlier, and they've got a little routine they're going to do. I asked if...
is this the dancing part?
No,
Oh,
this
okay.
is the straight part. The straight. We can do the dancing if things get slow.
Right.
I asked them whether or not...
We danced when we sold the last copy.
We did.
We'd like to see that. I asked them if they were going to reprint the book.
1,
2, 3.
No.
Now, and there are probably some good reasons for that. There are many of you probably know, of very books that they started out expensive and they got even more expensive through rarity, really. The quantity was sort of small, and I think, for example, of Peter Larson and Ben Erickson with their books on Fagoni, you almost have to buy one of those books because the minute you hesitate, it goes up another $100. But that's not been, well, I think that could happen here. I think that for someone who really wants this book after they realize it, that it might be worth a bit of money.
We made the decision early on that we weren't going to sell it through any wholesalers or any discounters, and because it was an expensive book, a lot of people that bought our book were people who never bought books before, young enthusiasts who really stretched to do it, and we wanted to protect their investment.
Yeah, which is noble, certainly. Along the way, have you figured out a demographic? Is there such a thing for Japanese collectible car enthusiasts?
It still skews younger for enthusiasts. I think collectors a little older, but it's still a work in progress. I don't think the mainstream collector group has really embraced the thing, but it's one step at a time.
Well, I remember a few years ago when a Toyota 2000 GT approached seven figures and then exceeded it, I think.
Yes.
And for most of you are familiar with Toyota 2000 GT, we have one in our exhibit here that Bobby Rahal loaned us, Bobby being a Toyota dealer and an enthusiast. It's kind of a 7/8 scale Jaguar E-Type, and many of the elements of that car, six-cylinder, twin cam, the shape and all, are, I thought when it was new, it was evocative. They only sold like 250 or so of that.
337. But
237,
yeah.
fair enough. But I still think that's a pretty cool car. But I don't think we can rank Japanese collectible cars as though they were all Toyota 2000 GTs or Mazda Cosmos. Are they kind of an aberration where these cars are concerned,
well,
perhaps?
it's just like not all American collectible cars are Duesenbergs. You know, it's one or the other. You know, they're great Model A speedsters out there.
But there are some cars that are coming on, you know, like a Subaru 22B. You know, that's a car that, you know, 5 years ago was a $70,000 car, and those have topped $300,000. The NSX Type Rs are also sort of coming on. So I think there's cars that may be the next Toyota 2000 GTs in the future. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's true. But I think the great thing about that hobby is that there's still a lot of cars, great cars that are accessible. Mm-hmm. So
Some are in the gallery.
Some are in the gallery. The Nissan Pulsar GTIR. I mean, stunning car, Group B rally car.
All-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive, intercooled, turbocharged, and they can still be had for under $20,000. Nice examples.
So what do you tell the guy or gal who has an RX-7 or a 240Z, 260Z? Hold on to it and up it'll go in value, or
No,
just enjoy it?
I say have fun.
Drive the heck out of it,
Yeah.
enjoy it, have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have, in the exhibit, there's a 240Z that Bruce was telling me that a long-term owner. And he's held on to it probably for 40 years now or so. And that's a guy who's truly enjoyed his car.
Well, and that's actually a pretty good formula for collectability, a car that's been in the same family for a long time, loved, cared for, and so forth. So I mentioned the Toyota 2000 GT and the Mazda Cosmo, both of which I've had experience driving, writing about, and so forth. They're very cool cars. What else out there? Can you kind of let us in on the ground floor of Japanese collectible cars? What these folk are here tonight, what should they look for if they?
So I think anything with a twin cam engine is interesting. Anything with all-wheel drive is interesting. Anything that has any relation to you know, homologation or rally racing. I added a car to my collection in the last 12 months. It's a Mazda Familia, which was a 323 in the United States, GTR, all-wheel drive, over 200 horsepower, was homologated, rally car, you know, $35,000, drives great, a lot of fun, and maybe has some potential. You know, it depends on what era you want. There's still some really cool cars from the 70s that haven't caught on. There's a Belay GTR in the gallery, twin cam car, independent suspension front and rear, really fun to drive, $35,000 car.
Yeah.
So where do you look for these cars? Assuming, I mean, again, our audience is enthusiastic enough to come and hear about them. If you were giving them some advice, where should they look?
You know, over the last 5 years or so, a lot of little import companies out of Japan have sprung up here in the United States. There's some good ones. There's some, not so good ones. Do your research as if buying in any car, right? They're great dealers and they're not so great dealers. Mm-hmm. But the good news is we have much more access now than we ever had, and stuff is starting to come up in Japan. So the majority of these cars are still in Japan, but the pipeline is there now, and that's a good thing. And in addition to some of the things to look for that in addition to the things that Mark mentioned, I would mention some of the off-brands, right? Not the Toyota, Mazda, Honda, Nissan type of things, but Isuzu, Suzuki, Hino, that we have examples of out there. If they're unknown in this country, they still have a good opportunity to find some of those deals. Anything that's low production, and anything that has, is technologically innovative for its time. This example is low production and technologically innovative. But by the same token, the same vintage, you can get a 12-cylinder Toyota Century for less than $20,000. The only 12-cylinder production car ever produced in Japan for under $20,000.
So apropos of that, I'm interested in a Japanese collectible car. You just said that a lot of them are in Japan. How hard is it to perhaps find a car and then import it into the United States?
Well, we did it 18 times while we were writing a book.
and
Unfortunately, it's not that hard.
And maybe a few more times since.
Well, walk us through the process, without putting us to sleep.
Okay, so there are dealers in Japan. There are with storefronts and that sort of thing. So you can go to Japan, or you can find these dealers online. It's not hard. There are also, as Myron mentioned, there's dealers and brokers in the United States that specialize in this. There are auctions in Japan. You can sign up for them. I don't think Myron and I ever have. We've done it through brokers, but you can bid on cars through these brokers. And there are some, very legitimate ones. So that's not really an obstacle. I mean, you need to find the right person to help you unless you want to go to Japan. But there's plenty of reputable people. You just have to avoid the ones that aren't reputable.
Right.
But it's very easy.
And, and Japan doesn't have Gooding or Barrett Jackson or Mecum, right? The collectible cars come up in the mass used car auctions. So that's why it's important to have a connection, have feet on the ground. The auctions, I don't know if you've ever looked at Japanese auction pictures. They go very, very fast. And for the country that makes the best cameras in the world, they take the worst photos. So it's really important to have, if you're going to buy a car at a Japanese auction, is to have feet on the ground. I bought a car recently, Toyota Harrier Zagato bodied Toyota SUV that they made very few of. It turned up at the auction. I got the call at 7 o'clock, and we had it inspected at 7:20, and by 7:30 I owned it. That's kind of has to be, but I couldn't use the photos that were there. The guy had to go down, take the pictures, and put the paint meter on it, make sure it's a good car. So
yeah, the photos it's almost like they're intentionally bad. Like, they're the size of a postage stamp, and if you try blowing them up, it's just a big blur.
So I'd never heard the expression JDM until a few years ago, Japanese domestic market cars. What's the fascination with those?
I think Myron alluded to this earlier. We sort of got the watered-down version of the cars that they had in Japan. If they had a twin cam, we had a push rod. If they had 270 horsepower, we got 200 horsepower. There were interesting body styles that we didn't get. There were cars that we didn't get altogether. But if it was an interesting Toyota in Japan, their strategy here was to make it just a daily driver. So
volume would be a consideration, that they just wanted to sell more cars and reliable cars, and so the JDM is sort of like the fruit that we never got in many cases.
In many cases, it's not better either, right? JDM is just kind of the forbidden fruit for the longest time.
Interesting. Why has it taken so long, do you think, for people here to recognize the collectibility of certain Japanese cars. And do you see that changing as a result of your book and maybe an exhibition like this and so forth?
You know, again, I think the Japanese kind of created that issue by sending us, you know, appliances for so long, which was really good for their business, but not necessarily good for their collectible image. So I think the fact as things trickle in, and it's going to take time because a lot of these cars, like the 2000 GT we talked about, they made 337. The LFA, they made 500. And neither one of those cars sold well when they were new either, by the way. So, you know, just by lack of inventory out there, lack of knowledge, one of the things, again, we created the book, was to start to create some of this notoriety and add legitimacy to this segment of the collector car hobby.
And I don't think the Japanese ever, until recently, have recognized that there's a such thing as collectible cars. Like, we've had car collectors in the United States, you tell me, since the 40s, since the 50s?
Actually, the 30s, yep.
Okay, 30s. The Japanese weren't thinking about, you know, collectible cars. They were thinking about, you know, the industry and making money and performance and reliability, but they weren't thinking these things are going to be collectible.
And enthusiasm in that part of the world is still very much an underground thing. A lot of these meets happen outside of mainstream events and areas.
So I think it was last year at Pebble Beach, you all had I want to call it off-site sort of presentation. Maybe you've done it 2 years in a row, but not on the concours field, but up on Peter Hay Hill, a gathering of cars, and I think in some cases the manufacturers were involved.
Infinity.
I mean, so what's been the response to that? And
Oh, I think it was spectacular. So it's on the property at Pebble Beach. It wasn't part of the Pebble Beach concourse, but it's on the property. So a large part of the Pebble Beach crowd saw the cars. 1 year we had the book there, and that was received very favorably. And then not this past year, not 2024, but 2023, we had a seminar like this, different focus, but on, you know, Japanese collectible cars. And that was very well attended, and I heard lots of people talking about it throughout the weekend. So I think it's gotten, you know, everyone's attention. I think there's a general momentum towards this. There's going to be a class at Pebble Beach this year, thanks to you.
yeah, we're doing a class of Japanese concept cars. Richard Adato and I have worked together on classes for Pebble Beach. This has been an unusual request with them. I'll just say real quick that I called people that I know in each of the major Japanese car companies, and to your point a moment ago, I showed them pictures of cars they'd never seen before. They were all in their say 40s and 50s. Some of these cars from the 60s, 70s, are fascinating. I mean, the Tokyo Motor Show used to be an absolute wonderland. I haven't been for a few years, of unusual cars. And we had, Richard and I got a hold of programs, all in Japanese, of course, looking at these interesting cars, and the only thing we could recognize was the name or the number. So, of course, we sent pictures to our friends, colleagues in Japanese car companies, and the initial answers were, we destroyed those. We didn't keep them. We didn't think anyone would be interested.
No one would care.
So
Yeah.
nobody would care. So we are, I don't want to say struggling, but let's say we are working hard on having 8 to 10 cars in this group. But
May I just say one other thing?
Sure.
The idea is not, Myron and I's idea is not that Japanese cars are everything and forget about everything else and focus on this. The idea is that this just needs to be part of the hobby and the conversation.
Yeah,
I think
and both of our collections consist of a minority of Japanese cars. We have
Right.
cars from everywhere else. So just general
even with the 18 that you just squirreled away, there's still,
Even with, yes.
yeah.
But don't tell our wife.
What's been the most fun thing that has happened for either of you with a Japanese collectible car?
You know, I guess for me, is just, I've owned my Cosmo, my Mazda Cosmo now for about a dozen years. And it was our only car at our vacation place for a couple of years, so it was a daily driver. I think I have just as much joy jumping in and driving that car because the experience, the driving experience, is so different than any other car I own. And looking at it, it's still a surprise every time I look at it. You know, it just feel really, really good. So I think it's just, the greatest thing for me is that the ongoing joy that this little car gives me every time I see it, every time I drive it.
Yeah, I don't think it's one car for me. I enjoy driving all of the Japanese cars, and they're totally different than the rest of my collection. I have a lot of Italian sports cars that sort of sound like an Italian opera and, you know, rev forever, and it's a different experience. One of the wonderful things about owning Japanese cars is every time you turn the key, it fires. So if you say, let's go for a ride, you're going for a ride. Not always the case with some of the exotic Italian things. But, you know, the other thing that's fun is people that come visit the collection, even if they're very knowledgeable on cars, there's always several of the Japanese cars that they're just sort of scratching their head. And there's a couple of them in the gallery like that.
I remember a number of years ago, there was a British magazine called Supercar Classics, and they asked me to write a story about the Toyota 2000 GT. And I found that there were two car dealers up in Maine who were the mother lode for this car. They restored them, they had one of the Carroll Shelby Pete Brock racing cars. They had one of the James Bond convertible 2000 GTs. They had it all. And of course, they turned me loose in several of them to drive, and they were very entertaining and so forth. But it just made me think that lurking below the surface here, there's all sorts of, let's say, authorities, sources, and so forth. And you probably found some of that with your research.
Yeah, so there's fringe lunatics for each model, not just the mark, but for each model, right? Yeah. There's the guy or gal that knows every single thing, way more than you want to know, right? So if we had a car that we were having trouble figuring out, because there's very little written about some of the cars, some of the Suzukis, some of the Daihatsus. So we would find, you know, these fringe lunatics that knew everything, who were nice people, but, you know, it'd be a 3-hour conversation.
The British call those people anoraks. They know everything about a narrow little slice of something, but they know everything about
everything.
That was our biggest concern in writing the book, because our book isn't the be-all, end-all on any one car. We wanted to get the exposure, get the basic facts, and maybe introduce something new that most people didn't know about something. But, you know, you talk about using your term, anoraks in the Miata crowd. They go, oh no, we're going to say something wrong. And that's why we took so long to research everything, make sure that even though we didn't put everything out there, everything we put out there we knew was absolutely fact.
Yeah, and we weren't just worried that we would get something wrong, because we were very careful, but it's a very big book, so anyone can make a mistake. But we were also worried that we were going to get criticism like, why didn't you include fill in the blank? And any one of these cars you can write a 300-page book about, right? You can write a 300-page book about the Acura NSX. You could probably write multiple volumes if you include the Type R and the first generation and the second generation. So one of our fears was that we were going to get, what about fill in the blank?
And did that happen?
No, mostly thank you for exposing these cars.
Yeah.
The other thing we tried to do for each of those groups, we tried to, again, dig up a new fact that wasn't out there public, like Mark mentioned, you know, the Skyline GTR wins, you know, that happened in 89, 90. Another one was finding every special edition Miata or MX-5 that was ever made in the world. That was your research.
You did a
right?
great job on that, Myron.
He spent like 3 weeks. I think we ended up like, 300 different special editions, 10 of them in South Africa of this special British racing green.
For any of you who use Excel spreadsheets, I was trying to find the last row. I could just never find the last row. So it just kept going.
I wanted to ask you kind of a mechanical question, and that's, you're both obviously busy people. Mark,
I'm not busy. No.
well,
I'm not
maybe not so much Myron. Mark's an orthopedic surgeon. He's still managed
little
to
busy.
turn out a book on Denzel and a book on American special sports cars and probably a couple more that I don't know. So how did you, this book is huge. How did you did you set up a time each day? I think we'd all like to know this for large projects that we have. How did two guys who have normal lives do something like this? Discipline, whatever is there a secret you can share with us?
I think working together is a big thing because we kind of held each other responsible. We kind of divided up the responsibilities. And it worked out well. We took the chapters that we wanted to do, but then we proofed each other's chapters. And Mark's a scientist, so his stuff was very analytical, very fact-driven. I've got a master's degree in anthropology, so mine was kind of softer, people-oriented. So I kind of softened his writing. He tightened up my writing. And again, having that accountable person to do that with really, I think, helped get us through it.
And we were both, very organized. Our files were organized, our photographic files, our text files. So we didn't waste a lot of time, right? You can waste a lot of time writing. And we didn't do that. We were a little bit like the Japanese. We were precise and we executed, and we didn't have to keep recovering the same ground.
Well, so one of you is in Texas, the other is in Ohio.
Dropbox.
Your art director was in
Seattle.
Well, Bainbridge Island.
Yeah.
Right.
State of Washington.
Right. So this book never would have happened, 30 years ago, right? No internet, no Dropbox.
No Zoom calls.
No Zoom calls. So the technology helped a lot. Mm-hmm. It also helped finding photographs. I would say that was, for me, that's always the hardest part of a book, is making sure you have the photographs, because the writing and the research you can always do, right? You can always find information. You never get stumped on that. But if you're looking for a picture of a car at the Nürburgring at this event, you can't call up 1-800-photograph.
And you don't speak Japanese.
And we do not speak Japanese. I hardly speak English.
So I have one more question, and then we have the opportunity to have you ask our guests some questions. But what do you tell the kid with a used Miata, a loved and used Miata, or the guy who's had that 240Z for decades, or wanted to go back to the 70s and bought one? What do you say to those folk about this collectibility of Japanese cars?
Don't worry about it. Drive the car, have fun. I bought my first Porsche 356 49 and a half years ago for $1,500 because it had a rebuilt engine and a fresh paint job. I haven't driven it in the last 20 years. We're in the process of recommissioning it so I can drive it again in June on our 50th anniversary. And I'm leaving the cosmetics. The Bondo is staying exactly where the Bondo was. The patch in the floor pan is going to stay where that is. The scrapes where my wife wrecked it the first time she wrecked it is staying right where it is. And we're going to love it.
I've been collecting for a little over 30 years, and I think I'll speak for Myron and myself. So we've done very well with some of the cars, financially, whether we've sold them or we just still have them and they've appreciated. But neither of us buy cars as investments, right? Neither of us.
Despite what we tell our wives, period.
Right. We buy the cars we love, and it's not always a clear thing, like I'm buying this because of X, Y, Z. Sometimes it's just a feeling, right? It's like meeting people. Sometimes you meet someone and you think, wow, I really hit it off with them. And if we asked you why, maybe you can't really articulate it. So the message is always, whether it's Japanese or anything else, buy the cars you love, buy the cars that move you, that mean something for you, and the appreciation or depreciation is going to happen on its own.
That's probably a very good place for us to turn to you all and see who might have a question for Mark or Myron.
Yeah, so Ken, if I could interrupt for just a second before we do the questions, I wanted to acknowledge a couple of people who have also loaned us cars that were able to come tonight. So I'd like to thank Southeast Imports. So they were able to loan us they're there up there. So thank you so much. They loaned us the AutoZam. So that's a fun car. So that's great. And also wanted to also thank Susan and Olivier Cerf from the Tampa Bay Museum. So thank you very much for loaning us the Mazda Cosmo. So, and if you guys will wait for us we'll have 2 microphones. Wait for us to get to you with the microphone because we are recording this and we won't be able to hear it. And we'll actually play this back on our YouTube channel later on. But if you will wait for us to bring you the microphone to ask your question. So if you would raise your hand and Tom and I will come to you.
Right.
So just a very quick question. Is the book available electronically?
No. No, and we again, it's something we decided to do early on because the tangible aspect of the book is an ultimate one of the most important parts of experiencing the book. So we're just not doing it there. Just like coming to the museum, you could see pictures. Bruce sent me pictures of the exhibit when it opened the other night. They were great. I got here, I walked into the gallery, and it was a different world. Experiencing something in person is a very important part of the thing.
It's not on tape either.
So I have a question. So let's say that I find a car, a very unknown car here, a Japanese car in the U.S. How are parts? How can I fix that car? Is there a lot of parts that are similar from cars to car? How does someone go about that?
So that's a good question. It like anything, your collection has an amazing variety of cars, and some of them are easy to get parts for, and some are miserable. So it really just varies from car to car. If it's a big manufacturer like Nissan, there's generally parts available worldwide. I don't know, what's it like for your Hino Contessa?
Hino Contessa ain't so good, but my last 6-7 years, my winter car, I live in the garden spot of the universe of Akron, Ohio. So for a winter car, the last few years, I've been driving JDM Toyota sedans, which are basically free over there because of the way the licensing laws work. So I've been driving Mark IIs and Crowns, and if you have the part, I found almost everything, even for engines that weren't sold in this country, that are available like at AutoZone or O'Reilly's or something like that. But you have to figure out how to get the part. But the books are there. If you're doing a mainstream manufacturer, almost everything is available in this country. And what's not, there's enough volume in Japan, and the pipeline is there now to get those things. Unless you're dealing with a Hino Contessa or something really, really obscure.
Right, but we were talking about, your Cosmo earlier, and, if you need parts or another engine for that car, forget about it. So it really depends not just on make, but on model. And that's something to think about before you buy a car.
I'm just curious how you two gentlemen met each other, because you're geographically undesirable, one in Texas and one in Ohio. And
We used to date. That's not true.
No. Not funny either. He's not my type, right? I go for blondes,
Seems like everybody's laughing. I don't know.
Bruce and I will tell you that the Q&A is our favorite part of this because we never know what people are going to ask, and we never know if we'll have the answer. So
the answer is...
Our wives will tell you that we're still dating.
Right.
That's the whole...
So the answer is that Myron is a very famous car collector, and I saw an article about him in Auto Week, And this was before the internet, so I looked up Myron Vernis in Ohio, and I just called him up. I cold called him, and we just started talking.
And that was about not Japanese cars, but just collecting in general and car collecting.
In general, and then I called him a few years later, and he tells the story better than I do.
I don't, about the French car.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I didn't even, I mean, he called me, I don't remember him calling me. He tells me he called me after that Auto Week article.
I'm not important. He's important.
Okay, that's right. That's right, I'm kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
But,
People know him.
so he called me a couple years later, and I don't recall, but.
Right.
it's okay.
I get that a lot.
We're still in love.
I
That's
get
okay.
that a lot.
I think you told me that someone said you were looking for a certain car. Mark had decided, Mark is a world famous land speed racer, vintage sports car racer, and he was building a car to set a record at Bonneville. And he carefully researched everything that he could, and he decided that the small bore class was the most vulnerable record. And he decided that the best car to do that with was a Deutsche Bonnet HBR5. Olivier, you're not included in here. Anybody else know what that is? Anybody else ever heard that? Okay, that's about right. That's about the right kind of ratio. Very obscure, kind of garage-built French sports car from the 50s. Won their class at Le Mans, the index of performance, 11 years, but that index of performance was set up so that a French small manufacturer could win it. Built, I think, 600 cars in about 12, 13 years. Decided that's what he wanted to do that with, and someone told me I had one. Actually, I had three. Didn't want to sell any of them, but then when he told me what he was going to do with it, then I said I had to do it. So that was really kind of the beginning of our.
Right. And it worked out well at Bonneville.
When did the JDM come in?
Is there any car being built today that will be collectible?
Of course. Don't ask me which one it will be.
You had a follow-up
I was
question?
going to say, where did the JDM come in?
So we just started, Myron and I talk every day, and we just started talking about, what are the interesting things that we haven't thought about? And we just started talking about Japanese cars, and I mean, we knew about 240Zs and some other things, and we just started talking, and I think Myron started buying cars before I did.
I think the Cosmo kind of kicked it off for me.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it was a Honda 1300 Coupe 9
Okay.
that I got from Martin Swee. Yeah.
But we just kept talking, and then we, were feeding it off each other, and then it became a competition, of course.
It really did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would get what car?
Right.
He got his. I was on vacation in Europe. We were both looking for a Z432 twin cam variant of the 240Z, and we both had brokers looking for one. One came up in auction in Japan. I was sleeping in Europe. He was awake in Houston. He got the car. I woke up to like 9 messages from my broker.
Regarding the availability of parts for these cars, do you have any thoughts on 3D printing?
There are people using 3D printing for some of the smaller parts now. I think it's kind of like obscure parts for American cars.
Or European cars. So, yeah. So I think neither of us are experts in 3D printing, but I think that's going to be more and more useful in the car hobby for all cars.
Yeah,
I don't have any experience with 3D printed parts in any of my cars.
I don't. I've seen some of the people doing taillights and things like that, but we haven't. Again, we haven't had experience with them. But it's a great tool. It's a great tool for any part of the hobby.
Yeah, and all technologies are helping the hobby. People are having extinct engines, remanufactured from scratch. If you have a very valuable Maserati race car, and either you don't have an engine or your engine blew up, or if you want to race it and you want to have a spare engine, there are companies, like there's a company, Crosswaith and Gardner, that'll make you anything, out of the UK, just from scratch.
Regarding the parts situation, I happen to own a 39-year-old Ferrari, and parts for those cars are obviously there was it was low production to begin with, and of course, in a matter of time, my mechanic found out that for a lot of parts, the best solution now is to take the existing part off the car and have it rebuilt. Of course, you need to find a good rebuilder, and he knows some guys on the West Coast will do Ferrari parts. I don't know who's going to do old Japanese parts, but there's probably someone in this country willing for a price to rebuild existing parts, which may take care of the supply situation. And regarding the availability of the book, there was a book published back in the 90s that's probably the holy grail of Ferrari books, called Ferrari in Camera, that some of the people in this room may be familiar with. I think there were 1,000 published. Again, a big, heavy book that hasn't been reprinted and apparently won't be. But it seems like, considering it's a big, expensive book, limited printing, there always seem to be 2 or 3 copies around somewhere that are available. And I think with your book, it may be just a matter of time, because the Ferrari book, as I say, has been around almost 30 years, and maybe owners die off or decide to pare their collection. So even if you never reprint your book, I suspect in a matter of time, there probably will be copies that will become available.
Oh, absolutely.
So for anyone who, see, I'm curious. I remember when the books first came out, I thought it was a bit big and expensive at the time, but seeing this collection and seeing the photos on the screen has kind of piqued my interest. I said,
I'll sell you mine.
Yeah, well, there you go. So maybe we'll just have to wait 10 years, 20, I don't know. I hope I live long enough to see that happen. But there's always a way. It just may be a matter of time.
Well, we're not selling any more books, but we sold some books. There's a dealer in the UK that bought 25 copies. Mm-hmm. So there's probably places that the book can still be bought. It's just Myron and I didn't do this so that we could be in the book selling business. We're delighted that we're out of the book selling business, but there are people who do that for a living, like Ben Horton in the UK.
Yeah, or Auto Books in Burbank. I know they have 2 copies. So if you want one, if you
Banks
really need one.
Would be because I checked before we came in here. I checked. Amazon has nothing. eBay had nothing. ABE Books had nothing. There seem to be no copies available. Maybe Auto Books has it, but I haven't found anyone yet who would.
It's the new Bitcoin.
Yeah, right. And you're absolutely right about rebuilding parts, right? The Japanese cars, they work on the same principles as any other piece of equipment, right? A couple of years ago, I had an Alfa Romeo Montreal, and the alternator went out. And I could get one out of Italy for $1,600. So I called the guy who was working on the generator for my Studebaker, one of my Studebakers. I said, this is it. Can you do anything with it? He said, is it an alternator? Does it generate electricity? He said, yeah. I took it to him. 6 hours and $75 later, I had a functioning alternator. So,
after all the research and the time you put into it, did you walk away with a favorite of any of the cars?
A favorite car?
Yeah, there's one car that is my holy grail that's in the book. It's in one of these. It's in one of these slides. Did you see the car with the psychedelic paint job on it? Yeah, that's a Mitsuoka Orochi Evangelion. They only sold 2, and they were sold through 7-Eleven stores. And that is my holy grail. I'll take one without the Evangelion paint, but yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that question. That's a question I get about all the cars in my collection, and I don't.
It's like, which one of your children is your favorite?
That is an easy answer for me. It's my daughter.
He only has one child.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of my answer too, because it's the next one, right? It's the Orochi, which I don't have.
Right. I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry.
I think we've got one more.
Yeah.
Time for one more question.
I sold my AutoZam. I liked it for a while.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
I would like to thank Myron and Mark. They're good friends. They're wonderfully knowledgeable, enthusiastic about what they do, and I'm looking forward to the book on Russian cars that you're.
No, I mean, you joke about that, but I've started collecting Korean cars, so keep an eye out.
Wow.
Oh, great. Thanks everyone. Appreciate
North
it.
Korea,
coming.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. I think that was cool and fun.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. Hope to see you at the next program.